we're going to talk about adding fractions. For the second part of this video, you will need to have already watched the video called Using an L-Chart, and you need to be proficient at using an L-Chart. So if you haven't seen that video or you're not very good at doing L-Charts, stop this video and go watch the Using an L-Chart video. Okay. First thing, when we have fractions that have the same denominator, let's say 3/7 plus 5/7, we have a very simple job. We just add the numerators, which is 3 plus 5, in this case 8, and then keep the denominator as 7. Now, this is a perfectly acceptable answer, 8/7, because it cannot be reduced. Sometimes you might want it as a mixed number, but when we start doing algebra, we actually want it as an improper fraction. We always want to reduce it, but we don't want to put it as a mixed number. So 8/7 is totally fine. If you really want to put it as 1 1/7, that's okay for now, but once you get to algebra, you're really going to want to leave it as 8/7. So you might as well get in the habit right now, and all of these videos will just leave them as improper fractions. Let's take a look at another one just to be sure. Let's say we have 5/24 plus 3/24. That's equal to 8/24, but that simplifies down to 4/12 or 2/6 or 1/3. And so the final answer is 1/3. So we added across and we kept the common denominator. The only way to add fractions is if they have a common denominator. What do we do if they don't? And this is the part that requires something called an L-chart. There are many ways to do this, but the way I'm teaching you is with an L-chart. If you have another way that works for you, you can just use that way. As long as it's mathematically sound, that's fine. But this L-chart works for many things, and you'll see that actually using an L-chart is quite useful. So let's say we have two fractions. Let's say 7/12, and we want to add 5/8 to that. The first thing we want to do is make our L-chart of the denominators, because we're looking for the lowest common denominator. And so we have 12 and 8. Now, 12, let's see, we could go 2 goes into both of those. Oh, but you know what? 4 goes into both those. I see that too. So I'm going to do that. And then we have 3 and 2. And that's it. We're done. That's our L-chart. So that's a pretty simple L-chart. And now we're going to take our 7/12 and we're going to multiply it by the number 1 in the form of 2/2. If you remember, we look diagonally down, and we're not multiplying it by 2, we're multiplying it by 1 in the form of 2/2. That is a critical piece because we don't want to change the value. So 7 times 2 is 14, and 12 times 2 is 24. Remember, with multiplying, you do multiply both the numerators and the denominator. With adding, they have to be the same denominator, and we keep the denominator. Now we're going to take the 5/8 and do a very similar thing, but we're going to multiply by 1 in the form of 3/3. And that gives us 15/24. 15/24, because 5 times 3 is 15, 8 times 3 is 24, and we smile a little bit, do a little happy dance, because both of those are 24. That means they are now common denominators, so we have a pretty good feeling that we did everything right. So we now add those two together. We keep our denominator of 24, and we add 14 plus 15, which is 29. And we look to see if that can be simplified, and it cannot. And so our final answer is 29/24. And again, you don't have to put that into a mixed number. Let's take a look at one more example. Let's say we had 3 2/5 plus 1 1/10. So now these have whole number parts, and there's a couple things that you can do. A lot of different ways to handle this. I'm going to show you one way that will always work, and it's a little bit more work sometimes, but I find it's just nicer to just always have it work. So what we're going to do is turn these into improper fractions. So whenever you see mixed numbers, we're going to turn them into improper fractions. That way you can add, subtract, multiply, divide them, use them in algebra, all the stuff you want. Like I've said earlier in a couple videos, we generally don't want mixed numbers. So 5 times 3 is 15 plus 2 is 17/5 plus 10 times 1 is 10 plus 1 is 11/10. And then I make my L chart out of 5 and 10. Oh, that's a pretty darn easy L chart. That becomes 1 and 2. And so I take my 17/5 and I multiply it by 1 in the form of 2/2. 17 times 2 is 34. 5 times 2 is 10. And then I take my 11/10 and I multiply it by 1 in the form of 1/1. That's kind of strange, but this still works. 11 times 1 is 11, and 10 times 1 is 10. And notice we did end up with the same denominator, which is great. That's what we were looking for. So tenths, and so that becomes 45/10, which does simplify, right? We can divide both by 5, and that gives me 9 halves. 9 halves. That's not bad, because I divided the top by 5 and divided the denominator by 5. I get numerator becomes 9, denominator becomes 2, and we get 9 halves. Okay, I know I said I'd only show you one more, but I do want to show you one just tiny weird thing that you should know about L charts that you might run into. So let's take a look. And let's say I want to add 3/5 and 5/7. And I go to make my L chart of 5 and 7. And you know that I told you that you could pick any number that goes into both of those that's not the number 1. Well, you may have noticed by now that there's already a little problem with this. There is no number that goes into both of those besides the number 1. So in this one case, if at the very beginning you only can put the number 1, then that's what you do, is you put the number 1, and you do 5 divided by 1 is 5, and 7 divided by 1 is 7, and that gives you the L chart. That gives you a pretty simple L chart to do, though. 3 times 7 is 21. 5 times 7 is 35. And then you have 5/7. We're going to multiply that times 7/7. And that's equal to 35. I multiplied by the wrong thing. See, even I make mistakes. I need to look diagonally. I need to multiply by 5/5. So that's 25/35. That's a lesson to not rush too much. I add those together, I get 46/35 because I keep the same denominator. And then I could try to simplify that into, not simplify, I could try to turn it into a mixed number if I wanted to, but there's no reason to do that. Okay, and that's it. Thank you very much. And sorry about that little mistake at the end.